My name is David Harmon, and I have spent my entire adult life seeking calm and order. When my wife passed away 3 years ago, leaving me to raise our daughter Lily alone, that need for structure only deepened. Every decision I made centered around creating stability for us both. Lily was born with muscular dystrophy. Her body weakens with each passing year, but her mind remains sharp as a tack. Her smile lights up rooms. Her laughter makes strangers turn and smile without even realizing why. She is my entire world. I chose Sycamore Heights specifically because it promised accessibility and tranquility. The neighborhood sat on relatively flat terrain with wide sidewalks. The houses were new and already built with wider doorways. The community pool had a proper lift for those with mobility issues. It seemed perfect on paper, a safe haven where Lily could maintain some independence. What the brochure did not mention was Karen Wilcox. I first encountered her the day we moved in. She appeared at our door with a binder thick with HOA regulations instead of the traditional welcome basket. She did not introduce herself as a neighbor. She introduced herself as HOA President Karen Wilcox, as if it were an elected government position rather than a volunteer community role. "You will want to familiarize yourself with these immediately," she said, not smiling. "Violations result in financial penalties. 3 strikes and we can begin eviction proceedings." I thanked her politely, assuming she was simply being thorough. I did not realize I was looking into the eyes of someone who viewed rules not as a framework for community harmony, but as weapons to be wielded against those who did not fit her vision of perfection. The violations began almost immediately. Our grass exceeded the permitted height by half an inch. Our trash cans remained visible from the street for 20 minutes past the allowed time. Lily's physical therapy equipment in the backyard constituted an unapproved recreation structure. Each time, Karen would appear with her clipboard and camera, documenting the infringement with the gravity of someone collecting evidence at a crime scene. Each time, I apologized and corrected the issue, hoping to simply keep peace. "Dad, why does that lady hate us?" Lily asked one evening after Karen had photographed a package left on our porch for more than the allowed 4 hours. "She does not hate us, sweetheart," I assured her. "She is just very serious about rules." Then came that Tuesday in April. Lily had a physical therapy appointment scheduled, and I was finishing some work in my home office while she watched television in the living room. We had left her customized wheelchair on the front porch landing as we always did, poised at the top of the ramp for easy access when it was time to leave. I stepped outside to load some documents in the car and felt my stomach drop. The wheelchair was gone, vanished. I rushed to the street, looking in all directions, thinking perhaps the wind had somehow moved it, an impossibility given its weight and brakes, but panic rarely follows logic. I called our neighborhood security service. I called the local police. I paced the sidewalk, my phone pressed to my ear, explaining to increasingly skeptical-sounding responders that someone had stolen a medical device in broad daylight from a gated community. That was when Karen emerged from her house across the street. She walked toward me with measured steps, her face composed in an expression of mock concern. But her eyes held the gleam of someone enjoying a private joke. "Is there some problem, David?" she asked, her voice musical with false innocence. "Someone took Lily's wheelchair," I said, still scanning the street desperately. "Have you seen anything unusual today? Anyone who does not belong in the neighborhood?" Karen tilted her head slightly. "Oh, that metal contraption that was sitting on your porch? Yes, I had that removed." My world stopped. "You, what?" "I confiscated unregistered property left in common view," she said, opening her clipboard. "Section 12, Paragraph 7 of the HOA bylaws clearly states that medical equipment must be stored out of sight of common areas." "That is not abandoned property," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "That is my daughter's wheelchair, her only means of mobility." Karen simply shrugged. "You should have filed the proper paperwork." "Where is it?" I asked, my voice strained as I fought to maintain composure. "Please just tell me where you put my daughter's wheelchair." Karen blinked slowly, her expression shifting from satisfaction to practiced confusion. I cannot recall exactly where it was taken. Perhaps to the community storage facility, or was it the donation center? She tapped her pen against her clipboard. These violations happen so frequently, it is hard to keep track. I stood there stunned by the casual cruelty. This was not about rules or aesthetics. This was power, raw and vindictive. I could hear Lily calling for me from inside the house. "Dad, what is happening? I need my chair." "Return it," I said, no longer asking. "Now." "File the proper paperwork through proper channels," Karen responded, her voice clipped. "And perhaps consider storing your medical apparatus in a less visually obtrusive location in the future. The wheelchair disrupts the aesthetic harmony of our community." I moved past her, heading straight to my car. I needed to find someone on the HOA board who would see reason. The community center housed their offices, and I drove there immediately, leaving Lily with a hurried explanation and promise to return quickly. The HOA boardroom was wood-paneled and self-important. 5 board members sat in high-backed chairs, looking down at me from their elevated platform. Karen had beaten me there somehow, standing at the podium as I entered. "This is the resident I mentioned," she said without turning. "The one with the recurring violations." The board chairman, a balding man with glasses perched on the end of his nose, peered down at me. "Mr. Harmon, we understand you are upset, but there are procedures in place for a reason." "This is not about procedures," I said, stepping forward. "This is about the illegal seizure of necessary medical equipment. My daughter cannot move without her wheelchair. What has been done is not just immoral, it violates the Americans with Disabilities Act." A woman to the chairman's right chuckled softly. "The HOA bylaws supersede when it comes to community aesthetics and visual obstructions. We have very clear policies about the storage of medical equipment." "There is no storage issue," I insisted, feeling my professional composure begin to crack. "This is active, daily-use equipment that my disabled child needs to function." "Perhaps you should consider a less visible mobility solution," another board member suggested. "Something more discreet." I stared at them, unable to process the level of callousness. These were not just Karen's minions, they were cut from the same cloth. People who valued perceived property values over human dignity. "Where is my daughter's wheelchair?" I asked again, my voice dropping. Karen stepped in. "As I said, I do not have precise information on where discarded items end up. You can file Form 27B to request information about confiscated property with a standard processing time of 30 business days." I left the meeting with nothing but a handful of useless forms and a burning sensation in my chest. When I returned home, Lily was waiting by the window, her face falling as she saw me return empty-handed. "They took it, did not they?" she asked quietly. "That lady took my chair." I had to carry Lily to the car for her therapy appointment. At 13, she was too old to be carried comfortably, and I could feel her embarrassment radiating as I lifted her from the house. Her eyes welled with tears she refused to let fall. "I am sorry, Dad," she whispered as I placed her in the passenger seat. "You have nothing to be sorry for," I said fiercely. "Nothing." The next morning, a new violation notice appeared on our door. "Unapproved landscape modification, dead patch of grass on front lawn." The day after, another. "Unauthorized vehicle parking, car parked 6 inches from optimal driveway position." This was no longer about rules. It was punishment for challenging authority. Each citation carried a fine, each fine a message: submit or suffer. I began documenting everything. I installed a small, unobtrusive security camera above our front door. I started a journal, noting every interaction with Karen and the board. I photographed every citation, every supposed violation. I recorded conversations when legally permitted to do so. Late at night, after Lily had fallen asleep, I would sit at my kitchen table surrounded by notes and photographs. I was building something, not yet sure what shape it would take, but knowing it needed to be methodical and comprehensive. "I know what you are doing," Karen said to me one morning as I retrieved our mail. She had appeared silently beside our mailbox, her eyes cold. Troublemakers do not last long in Sycamore Heights. I looked at her calmly. I am simply being thorough, I replied, something I believe you value. She leaned closer. Your daughter will never fit in here, neither will you. Save yourself the struggle and move somewhere more accommodating. As she walked away, I felt something crystallize within me. This was no longer about a wheelchair or HOA violations. This was about dignity, about justice, about standing up to bullies who mistook cruelty for authority. I would need to become something I had carefully avoided in this neighborhood: visible. There is something important you should know about me, something I had deliberately kept from my neighbors when I moved to Sycamore Heights. I am Federal Judge David Harmon of the Ninth Circuit Court. I had chosen anonymity in my personal life for both privacy and peace. My career dealt with enough conflict. Home needed to be a sanctuary. When we moved here, I introduced myself simply as David, working in the legal field. Not a lie, but far from the complete truth. Now that carefully maintained separation between my professional and personal worlds was becoming a strategic advantage. I knew exactly how far Karen was overstepping, not just morally, but legally. The Americans with Disabilities Act is not a suggestion. It is federal law that supersedes HOA bylaws regardless of what Karen and her board believed. But revealing myself immediately would be a nuclear option. Once deployed, there would be no going back to normalcy. So I began with subtler methods. I drafted formal letters to the County Disability Rights Office, carefully worded to conceal my identity while precisely citing relevant statutes. I filed them under a pseudonym, presenting myself as a concerned citizen who had witnessed discrimination. The actions described herein constitute a clear violation of Title III of the ADA, regarding public accommodation and services operated by private entities, I wrote, knowing exactly which legal pressure points would trigger official attention. I also began quietly helping others. Martha Jenkins lived 3 doors down, a single mother with 2 children who had received violations for having a basketball hoop in her driveway. I anonymously provided her with legal counterarguments based on previous cases, showing how the HOA was selectively enforcing recreational equipment rules. When Martha won her appeal, it sent ripples through the board. Karen was livid, storming through the neighborhood with her clipboard clutched so tightly her knuckles whitened. The retaliation came swiftly. A formal notice appeared on my door, citing illegal structural modifications to property exterior. They were targeting Lily's wheelchair ramp now. All exterior modifications must maintain architectural consistency with neighborhood aesthetic guidelines, the notice read. The current ramp structure violates Section 8 of community bylaws. Removal required within 7 days or daily fines will be assessed. I photographed the notice and added it to my growing file. Then I contacted a journalist friend under an assumed name, suggesting they might find interesting material in reviewing the Sycamore Heights HOA's handling of disability accommodations. The day after I received the ramp violation, Lily came home from school unusually quiet. When I asked what was wrong, she simply shrugged and wheeled herself to her room, using the temporary chair we had been forced to rent at considerable expense. Her school therapist called me that evening. "Mr. Harmon, I am concerned about Lily's emotional state," she said carefully. "Today in our session, she mentioned feeling like she was causing trouble in your neighborhood. She said someone told her that special needs people should live in special needs communities." My blood ran cold. Who told her that? She would not say, but she is internalizing the idea that her disability is a burden to others. This is extremely concerning developmentally. I thanked the therapist and went to Lily's room. She was attempting homework, but I could see her mind was elsewhere. "Sweetheart," I said gently, sitting beside her, "you know that your chair and your ramp are not problems, right? They are just tools, like glasses for people who cannot see well." Lily looked up, her eyes too serious for a 13-year-old. "But they make other people angry. That Karen lady keeps talking to the other neighbors about us." "What matters is not what she thinks," I said, taking her hand. "What matters is what is right." That night, after Lily was asleep, I sat in my office staring at my judge's credentials. Years of carefully separated worlds were colliding. I had always believed justice worked through proper channels, through careful procedure and measured response. But what happens when the system protects those who abuse it? When rules become weapons rather than shields? I made a decision then. I would not yet reveal my position, but I would no longer act with restraint. Karen had brought this fight to my door, to my child. The time for shadows was ending. Finding the wheelchair took less detective work than I anticipated. My security camera had captured Karen wheeling it away the day she took it, loading it into her SUV with practiced efficiency. But where had it gone from there? I hired a private investigator, an old courthouse colleague named Marcus who owed me a favor. I gave him Karen's license plate number and the date of the incident. Look for second-hand medical equipment sales, I suggested. She strikes me as someone who would want a profit from her cruelty. 3 days later, Marcus called. Found it, he said without preamble. Sunshine consignment on Redwood Drive. Owner says a woman matching your description sold it to them claiming her mother had passed and she was liquidating medical equipment. The shop was 40 minutes outside our community, far enough that Karen likely assumed I would never find it. The owner, a heavy-set man named Greg, recognized me immediately when I entered. "You are here about the custom wheelchair," he said, not a question. "Yes." He disappeared into a back room and returned pushing Lily's chair. Now partially disassembled, its specialized cushions removed, the customized arm supports detached. "Lady brought it in about 2 weeks ago," Greg explained. "Said it was her mother's. We do not usually question people, but something felt off. Chair is obviously built for someone smaller, worth about 4,000 new with these modifications." "How much did she get for it?" I asked. 800. I have the receipt and security footage if you need it. I did need it. I needed every scrap of evidence, every paper trail, every documented moment of Karen's actions. I paid Greg the 800 plus a restocking fee to recover the wheelchair, then requested copies of all his documentation, which he provided without question. "Get a lot of Judge Judy types in here trying to scam us," he explained as he burned security footage to a DVD. "Started keeping everything on record." The pieces were coming together now. I compiled a binder of evidence, photographs of the confiscation notice, email threads with the HOA board, copies of the relevant ADA statutes, the receipt and footage from the consignment shop, the medical documentation showing the wheelchair was custom-fitted for Lily's specific condition. I visited an old law school friend, Ilana Diaz, now practicing disability rights law. I presented the case as a concerned citizen seeking consultation. "Your friend has grounds for a major lawsuit," Ilana said after reviewing my materials. "This is textbook discrimination under federal law. The HOA cannot simply override ADA requirements because they do not like how accessibility equipment looks. And selling someone's medical equipment, that crosses into criminal territory, conversion of property at minimum, possibly theft." The legal foundation was set, but something else was happening in Sycamore Heights, something unplanned but welcome. Neighbors were beginning to talk. Martha Jenkins had shared her story of fighting back against the HOA. Others were comparing notes on Karen's selective enforcement. The facade of community consensus was cracking. Karen must have sensed it because her behavior grew more erratic. She began patrolling the neighborhood at odd hours, photographing minor infractions with increased zeal. 3 more homeowners received citations the same week I recovered the wheelchair. Meanwhile, I had arranged for Lily to receive a temporary replacement chair while we repaired her customized one. When it arrived and I assembled it on our driveway, Lily rolled out to test it, her face breaking into the first genuine smile I had seen in weeks. "Can we go to the park, Dad, just for a little while?" We did go to the park, and as Lily rolled along the paths, feeling a small measure of independence restored, I made silent promises to myself and to her. This would never happen again, not to us, not to anyone in this community. That evening, I began drafting the federal ADA violation complaint. Each paragraph was measured, precise, the language of law rather than emotion, though emotion fueled every word. I cited cases, precedents, specific statutes that Karen's actions had violated. When finished, it ran to 27 pages, a comprehensive indictment not just of one incident, but of a pattern of discriminatory behavior sanctioned by an entire HOA board. I was no longer David the neighbor. I was Judge Harmon now, wielding the law like the instrument of precision and justice it was meant to be. The wheel was turning. Karen just did not know it yet. I filed the complaint with the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division on a Tuesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, the regional office had flagged it for priority review, not because I was a federal judge, but because the evidence was so compelling and the violations so egregious. Simultaneously, I reached out to a local news producer who specialized in consumer advocacy stories. I did not identify myself beyond a concerned resident of Sycamore Heights and shared only the publicly available aspects of the case. I believe there is a pattern of disability discrimination occurring in our community, I wrote. Multiple residents have experienced harassment and violations of their federally protected rights. The producer responded within hours. By Friday, a news van was parked at the entrance to our community. The headline that evening: Exclusive, HOA accused of selling disabled child's wheelchair. Karen's name appeared in the second paragraph. Her position as HOA president prominently noted. The station had attempted to contact her for comment, but she had declined, a tactical error that made her appear guilty in the court of public opinion. The reaction in Sycamore Heights was immediate. Neighbors who had quietly tolerated Karen's regime suddenly found their voices. People stopped me on the street to express outrage and sympathy. Several admitted they had also faced harassment, but had been too intimidated to speak up. An emergency HOA board meeting was called the following Monday. I attended, sitting quietly in the back row as homeowners lined up to speak. The boardroom that had once intimidated me now seemed small and shabby, a petty fiefdom rather than a seat of authority. Karen sat rigidly at the center of the board table, her face a mask of indignation as neighbor after neighbor recounted stories of harassment, selective enforcement, and intimidation. We moved to temporarily suspend Karen Wilcox from her duties pending investigation, one board member finally proposed, clearly reading the room's mood. The motion carried with only Karen voting against it. She stood up, face flushed. This is a witch hunt. I have done nothing but enforce the rules we all agreed to when moving here. The room fell silent. This was the moment I had carefully considered, when to step forward, when to reveal what I had kept private. I rose from my seat. The rules we agreed to cannot supersede federal law, I said clearly, my voice carrying through the room. And federal law is unambiguous on these matters. All eyes turned to me. Karen's narrowed in recognition and suspicion. And who are you to lecture us on federal law? She demanded. I am David Harmon, I replied calmly. Father of Lily Harmon, resident of 347 Sycamore Lane, and sitting judge on the Ninth Circuit Court of the United States. The silence that followed was absolute. I continued, my tone measured and precise. The actions taken against my daughter and others in this community constitute clear violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Fair Housing Act, and potentially several state statutes regarding property theft and discrimination. The Department of Justice has already opened an investigation based on the evidence provided. Karen's face drained of color. You have been planning this, she accused, setting me up. No, Karen. I have simply been documenting what you have done, openly and proudly, in the name of community standards. The fact that your actions are indefensible under federal law is not a setup. It is the consequence of choices you made. The meeting dissolved into chaos after that. Karen attempted to paint me as manipulative, claiming I had infiltrated the community under false pretenses. But her arguments found no purchase. The tide had turned decisively. As I left the meeting, neighbors approached to shake my hand, to apologize for not standing up sooner, to share their own stories. Some asked legal questions which I politely deferred, explaining that I could not offer specific advice given my position and the ongoing investigation. Lily was waiting up when I got home, her eyes questioning. "Is it over?" she asked simply. I sat beside her wheelchair. "Not quite yet, but things are changing, sweetheart. People are standing up now." She nodded thoughtfully. "I am glad you did not let her win, Dad." I hugged her tightly, overwhelmed by the simple wisdom of children who see justice in its purest form, not as statutes and precedents, but as right overcoming wrong. The formal hearing was scheduled 6 weeks after my revelation at the HOA meeting. During that time, Sycamore Heights existed in a strange limbo. The board continued to function with Karen suspended, but everyone knew bigger changes were coming. Karen was served legal papers at her home, not just the DOJ complaint, but a separate civil action for the theft and sale of Lily's wheelchair. She responded with a countersuit claiming harassment and defamation, but it was quickly dismissed by the court as frivolous. The Department of Justice expanded their investigation beyond Karen to examine the HOA's practices as a whole. Investigators interviewed dozens of residents, reviewed years of meeting minutes and violation notices, and analyzed the pattern of enforcement actions. What they found surprised even me: systematic targeting of households with elderly residents, families with children, and anyone who had ever questioned board decisions. The discrimination against Lily was not an isolated incident, but part of a broader pattern of abuse. On the morning of the hearing, I dressed carefully in a dark suit, not my judicial robes, as I would be attending as a witness and plaintiff, not in my official capacity. I had recused myself from any professional involvement to ensure impartiality in the proceedings. The federal courthouse downtown was familiar territory, though sitting on the other side of the bar felt strange. Lily insisted on attending, dressed in her best blue dress, her wheelchair polished and repaired to its former condition. "I want to see," she said firmly when I suggested she might find it boring or upsetting. "I need to see what happens when people stand up." Karen arrived flanked by 2 attorneys, her head held high but her eyes darting nervously around the courtroom. She had lost weight in the weeks since her suspension, and her usually immaculate appearance showed signs of strain, chipped nail polish, a slight unevenness to her makeup. Judge Rebecca Alvarez presided, a colleague I respected for her thoroughness and impartiality. She nodded slightly in professional acknowledgement as I entered, but otherwise gave no indication of our professional connection. The proceedings began with the DOJ attorney presenting their findings. Charts displayed on screens showed the statistical improbability of the HOA's enforcement patterns occurring randomly. Emails between board members revealed explicit discussions about maintaining neighborhood standards by discouraging certain elements from remaining in the community. Karen's testimony came after lunch. Under the skilled questioning of the DOJ attorney, her composure began to crack. "Did you authorize the removal of a customized wheelchair from the Harmon residence on April 17th? The attorney asked. "It was in violation of clear HOA bylaws regarding storage of personal items," Karen insisted. "Was it being stored, Mrs. Wilcox, or was it in active use? The distinction is irrelevant to the bylaws. But relevant to federal law, is it not? Were you aware that the Americans with Disabilities Act supersedes HOA regulations when it comes to necessary accommodation?" Karen shifted in her seat. "Our community has aesthetic standards that all residents agreed to uphold." "Did you personally profit from the sale of medical equipment belonging to a disabled child?" The question hung in the air. Karen looked toward her attorney, who remained impassive. "I was disposing of abandoned property according to HOA protocol," she finally said, "by selling it at a consignment shop 40 miles away and keeping the proceeds. I do not recall the specific financial arrangement." The attorney produced the receipt from Sunshine Consignment, complete with Karen's signature and driver's license number. "Does this refresh your recollection, Mrs. Wilcox?" Something broke in Karen then. Her carefully constructed justifications collapsed under the weight of documented evidence. "The rules have to apply to everyone," she said, her voice rising. "If we make exceptions, property values suffer, the community suffers." "No further questions," the DOJ attorney said quietly. When it came time for Lily to speak, the courtroom fell completely silent. She wheeled herself to the witness stand without assistance, her back straight despite her physical challenges. "Lily," the attorney asked gently, "can you tell the court how you felt when your wheelchair was taken?" Lily looked directly at Karen as she answered. "I felt invisible," she said, her voice soft but clear. "Like I did not matter, like being able to move around my own neighborhood was less important than how things looked." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "The wheelchair is not just a thing, it is my legs. Taking it was like taking part of me." She looked down at her hands. "What hurt most was knowing someone saw me using it every day and still decided I did not deserve to have it." There were tears in the courtroom after that, not from Karen, who sat stone-faced, but from spectators, attorneys, even one of the court reporters. The simple truth from a child's perspective cut through the legal arguments to the heart of the matter. Judge Alvarez's ruling came swiftly. The HOA was found in violation of multiple federal statutes. Karen was personally liable for the theft and sale of the wheelchair. The current HOA board was to be dissolved and reconstituted under court supervision to ensure compliance with federal housing and disability laws. Most significantly, Karen was permanently banned from serving in any HOA leadership capacity and ordered to complete 80 hours of community service with organizations serving people with disabilities. I did not cheer or celebrate as we left the courthouse. Neither did Lily. There was no joy in watching someone face consequences, no matter how deserved. There was only the quiet satisfaction of systems working as they should, protecting the vulnerable, holding the powerful accountable. Spring bloomed in Sycamore Heights. New flowers appeared in gardens that had once been regulated to uniform plantings. Basketball hoops emerged in driveways. A community that had lived under the shadow of petty tyranny was slowly, cautiously embracing freedom. Lily returned to school with renewed confidence. Her teachers noted the change. She raised her hand more often, joined clubs she had previously avoided, invited friends over without worrying about potential HOA violations. "Dad," she said one evening as we shared dinner, "Jenny wants to come for a sleepover this weekend. Can we set up the tent in the backyard like we used to at the old house?" "Of course we can," I replied, realizing it had been years since such a simple request would have been possible without fear of citation. I returned to my courtroom duties with a shifted perspective. The law had always been my profession, but now I understood its purpose more personally than ever before. Each case that came before me represented real people with real stakes, not just abstractions or precedents. The new HOA board held its first meeting in the community center. 7 members had been elected, a diverse group including a retired teacher, a young mother, an architect, and Martha Jenkins, who had been one of the first to stand up to Karen. They began by scrapping the old bylaws entirely and drafting new ones focused on community support rather than control. Reasonable standards remained for safety and maintenance, but gone were the arbitrary aesthetic regulations that had been weaponized against residents. They invited me to review the new regulations for compliance with federal law. I declined to avoid any appearance of undue influence, but recommended several qualified attorneys who could provide that service. Karen listed her house for sale 3 weeks after the hearing. She moved out quietly one weekend, hearing movers rather than asking for help from neighbors as was customary in Sycamore Heights. No one saw her leave. No one seemed to notice her absence except as a lifting of tension from the community atmosphere. That summer, I rebuilt Lily's ramp with help from neighbors. We made it wider, sturdier, with gentle curves instead of strict angles. Lily chose bright flowers to plant along its edges, yellows and purples that attracted butterflies and made her smile each time she used it. The final touch was a small plaque at the base of the ramp. "All are welcome here." Not a declaration of victory, but a simple statement of what should have been true all along. Sometimes in the evening, I sit on our front porch and watch Lily roll down that ramp with friends from school, laughing as they head out for adventures in a neighborhood that now feels truly like home. I think about power then, how it can corrupt in small ways before large ones, how easily rules become weapons rather than protections. I think about justice too, not the formal kind I administer in my courtroom, but the deeper kind that emerges when communities stand together against what is wrong. Lily catches me watching sometimes and waves, her smile bright and unworried. In those moments I understand what victory really looks like. Not Karen's departure or the legal vindication, but this. A child rolling freely down a ramp she no longer fears will be taken away. Some battles are fought with legal briefs and courtroom arguments, but the most important ones are fought with quiet persistence, with documentation, with community, with the stubborn insistence that dignity matters more than rules, that people matter more than property values. In the end, justice did not arrive like a thunderclap. It came like the flowers along Lily's ramp, one bloom at a time, persistent, inevitable, bringing color back to a place that had forgotten what it meant to truly be a home.